Pretty Girl Club. Welcome back to the Social Climbing series. And in this episode, I want to talk about stereotypes, positive stereotypes, and how to use those to your advantage. I've noticed that a lot of negative minded people, they only talk about the negative stereotypes they face or, how much it sucks to be them or whatever. And I want to learn how to transmute and alchemize stereotypes so that they can be utilized to your advantage. So I'm going to give some examples of how I've done that in my personal life. So for example, wearing the color pink. A lot of people stereotype the color pink as being very feminine. So much so to the point where some men, they don't want to wear the color pink because they don't want to be associated with femininity. They would rather look more masculine. But for me personally, because I like feminine colors and like feminine stereotypes, I view that as positive for myself. And so one thing I've noticed is that everything you do in life, it can affect you negatively or positively, and it can affect someone else negatively or positively. Whenever I talk about controversial topics on here, like privilege, a lot of people actually get offended because they are working under the false belief that they themselves do not have any privileges. So because they don't know how to recognize their own value, they just view you as like thinking you're better and all that. But the bottom line is that everybody has pros and cons. And so, yes, there are certain things that may be a con for me that may be a pro for someone else. So, for example, I am not a multimillionaire. There are other women out there who are multimillionaires. So, if they were to create a YouTube channel about multimillionaire lifestyles for women and kind of how to use your financial privilege to your advantage, I wouldn't be offended by that because those women have the right to utilize their skills and privileges to their advantage. So instead of me being jealous of the fact that those women have their own space to navigate their newfound privileges, what I would do is I would actually go and learn from them, because the same people who shame you for having a privilege or for having positive stereotypes, those same people want to have positive things going for themselves. And so that's rule number one in this whole conversation, is to remember that everybody actually has a form of privilege, whether they realize it or not. The problem is that people compare their privilege to other people's privileges, and sometimes they have a tendency to focus on the things that they don't have. It reminds me of when people say, like, you can't enjoy your own food if you're focusing on someone else's plate. And so I think that's where people go wrong. But I want to talk about how to utilize positive stereotypes to your advantage. Because you have to remember that for every negative, there is also a positive. And so instead of focusing on all the bad stereotypes, focus on the positive stereotypes that you want to be associated with. These could be positive stereotypes about how you dress. This could be using color psychology to your advantage or utilizing your tone of voice to your advantage. So for example, I've noticed that if you are an articulate person, people tend to stereotype that as talking white. And the reason that I actually don't get angry is because I understand that only ignorant people think that white people are articulate and that people of color can't be articulate. And so I'm actually not offended by that. I'm not going to change my voice to speak in a different accent to try to prove to others that I'm breaking a stereotype. So that's another form of good girl syndrome, actually. It's that constant desire to be a social justice warrior. So if somebody says, oh, you're wearing pink, you're just trying to look more feminine. You just think you're cute. You're just trying to be associated with femininity. You're being a pick-me. I've noticed that people will say stuff like that because they want to use reverse psychology in order to trick you out of utilizing positive stereotypes to your advantage. So when it comes to femininity, that's a positive stereotype that I would like to be associated with. So the way that I will utilize that is I will wear clothing items or do things that are associated with femininity. So for example, wearing dresses, wearing skirts. A lot of people stereotype dresses and skirts as being feminine. So if I want to be perceived as more feminine, I'm definitely going to utilize feminine clothing items or makeup items and stuff so that I can influence other people's perception of me in terms of fashion and my appearance. So that's actually a subconscious way of using stereotypes to your advantage. Another way you can do it is you can actually look at your own internalized positive stereotypes. So for example, for whatever reason, I tend to associate the half up, half down hairstyle with being a Victoria's Secret model. And I think part of this is because I grew up in the early 2000s watching a lot of those Victoria's Secret fashion shows, and a lot of those women had that hairstyle. And so my positive stereotype of a half up, half down hairstyle is that it makes a person look like a Victoria's Secret model. So if I ever want to utilize that to my advantage, and maybe I want to like look sexy, I tend to associate that hairstyle with like being sexy, basically, like modeling, being sexy, being kind of sassy. My internalized stereotype of a half up, half down hairstyle is that you are very fashionable and stylish. So those are examples of positive stereotypes. And so I want you to start thinking if there are any fashion items or if there are any particular looks that you associate with something positive. Another positive internalized stereotype I have is about red lipstick. I tend to associate red lipstick with seduction. For whatever reason, I also tend to associate red lipstick with Selena, the singer. I think part of it is because whenever I wear my red lipstick and wear my hair black, kind of in that same hairstyle, I feel like it kind of gives those vibes a little bit. So I associate it with like sass and boldness. So that's another positive stereotype. So I want you to start thinking, what positive stereotypes do I want to be associated with? Is it femininity? Is it being classy and bougie? A part of why I love matching monochromatic outfits is because I have a positive stereotype about them. And the positive stereotype is that if you wear all pink from head to toe, that you're probably bougie and very girly. Or if you wear those little Chanel suits, even if it's a fake one, even if it's like a rip-off version of it, or if you wear kind of like these Stacey Dash looking outfits, my positive stereotype of those things is that you are very feminine, that you're classy, that you're bougie. Even if I think about high heels, I've noticed that I have different internalized stereotype for each type of high heel. So I associate the shorter heels, I think they call them kitten heels. I associate the shorter heels with being professional, being very walkable, like you can kind of walk for a long time in the lower heels. That's the positive stereotype that I associate those heels with. And then for like stilettos, the positive stereotype I have is that you're going out somewhere. You know, you're going somewhere fun. You're going out to a bar. You're going to a fancy restaurant. And then when I think of the super tall platform heels, especially if they're clear or if they have a lot of glitter and stuff, I tend to associate that more with like being very sexy, because I do think of strippers. For some people, they don't want to be associated with strippers and they don't want to be associated with being hypersexualized. But for some women, they do want their legs to look extra sexy, or they want their legs to look extra long. And so as you're watching this, I want you to start thinking to yourself, okay, what stereotype do I associate with each fashion item? And if you really want to get deep with it, you can start looking at your positive stereotypes around certain body types or even your own ethnic group. So for example, one thing that I love about being associated with Blackness is I love the sassiness and kind of the attitude and kind of like that unfriendly black haughty vibe that I give off sometimes. That is positive for myself because I like that. I personally like that. I also associate my bougie stereotype with coming from Blackness as well. And so those are two positive things that I can think of. I also associate my Blackness with having talent or having lots of creative skill and maybe like having more of a versatile sense of fashion, because for me, growing up around a lot of non-Black people, I noticed that their sense of fashion generally was a lot more conservative. And so one positive stereotype that I play into is being that fashionista, or like being very stylish, or maybe wearing a slightly bigger piece of jewelry sometimes. Maybe my earrings are a little bit bigger sometimes, or maybe I wear like a larger necklace sometimes. Those are examples of positive stereotypes. Something else you can do is you can ask yourself, okay, are there any positive stereotypes that I want to play into that will increase my social status? So for example, when I think of my Latin American heritage, I think of being bilingual and, being smart enough to speak multiple languages. That is a positive stereotype that I personally want to lean into as much as possible. So the way that I utilize that is if I go to some sort of Mexican food truck, if I go to some sort of restaurant or a Spanish-speaking establishment, I will practice my Spanish. because I want to utilize all of the positive aspects of myself and my background to my advantage. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I've noticed that a lot of women, whenever they talk about femininity, it tends to revolve around the male gaze, or it tends to revolve around attracting a hypergamous marriage. And I'm not against that. If that's what you want, by all means, you should get that. But I like to make things more practical. I like to think about how I can utilize some of these skills in my everyday life. So, for example, if you want to look professional at work, let's say you want to be associated with professionalism. Okay, what do you think of in your mind when I say that word, professional? Or when I say, think of a professional woman? What image pops up in your head? Because whatever image pops up in your head, that's your stereotype. That's the stereotype that you have of that particular word. And so you can actually do these psychological experiments on yourself, and you can think to yourself, okay, I want to think of a gorgeous, like a drop dead gorgeous woman. What image pops up in my mind? So for me, just a second ago when I said that, Stacey Dash actually came to mind, like in her Clueless outfits, like from that movie. So now I can psychoanalyze myself and say, okay, so I tend to associate drop dead gorgeous with monochromatic matching outfits, high heels that match the outfit, kind of like this bougie aesthetic, and having my hair and kind of like this effortless hairstyle, kind of slightly curled hair, because Stacey Dash in Clueless, her hair is kind of curled. And I also associate Drop Dead Gorgeous with being feminine, because when I think about the stereotype that just popped up in my head, the positive stereotype, which was Stacey Dash, she's always wearing very bright colors. I don't remember any scenes in Clueless where Stacey Dash was just only wearing everything all black. I noticed that she always had a pop of color, so even if she was wearing black, maybe she would have like a red shirt or red lipstick. So do you see how I was able to just psychoanalyze myself and utilize my own internalized positive stereotypes in order to improve myself and social climb? And by the way, let's talk about that phrase, social climbing, because I've noticed that a lot of people, whenever you hear that phrase, they think that social climbing is something bad. So this channel has actually helped to pioneer and revive that phrase, social climbing, so that it's no longer associated only with things that are bad. Because I've noticed that one reverse psychology tactic that other communities have used on women of color is they will try to say, you know, social climbing's bad, or like she's just a social climber, she's a gold digger, she's this, she's that. And they will try to shame those types of women when deep down inside, that person is only saying that as a reverse psychology tactic to get you to essentially stay at the bottom or stay in your place, or, you know, don't level up. And so what I've done is I've tried to take back that phrase, social climbing, and not associate it with something bad, because I feel like a person can increase their social status without having to actively harm anyone. And I think that another negative stereotype is that people associate social climbing with you think you're better than everybody else. And once again, that's another reverse psychology tactic. They want you to prove that you don't think you're better by staying at the bottom, quote unquote. And so when I say that phrase, social climbing, I actually want you to think in your mind, what do you think of when I use that phrase, social climbing? So actually, Lori Harvey just popped into my mind. So I actually read this article yesterday where apparently Lori Harvey is dating some multi-billionaire. I mean, I have my own conspiracies about Hollywood and all this stuff, but Lori Harvey happened to come to mind when I thought about social climbing. The Kardashians are also popping up in my mind. So I'm going to go ahead and psychoanalyze my stereotypes about social climbing. So because the Kardashians and Lori Harvey popped up, that means that my idea of social climbing is that you don't necessarily have to be the most talented, because none of those women are like singers or actresses or anything. Well, maybe they do some of that, but just not on the level of other people. So I think of someone who doesn't have to be the most talented. She doesn't have to be the most hardworking person, but she has a lot of finesse skills. And that's really the content that you'll find on this channel. It's kind of like finessing content, how to finesse your way into the right rooms. And so my positive stereotype about social climbing is that you literally can be quote unquote mediocre and still live the life you want to live, whether you want to be wealthy, whether you want to be famous, maybe you want to be an influencer like Lori Harvey. And so now I've been able to discover that anytime somebody says so and so is mediocre and she's just famous and mediocre, what that really means is that that person is actually good at social climbing. It means that their social climbing skills are outweighing their talents, which is not a bad thing. Like if you analyze the Ice Spice and Baby Storm situation, Baby Storm accused Ice Spice of stealing her friends, and then, Baby Storm's friends, they made Ice Spice's album for her or something like that. Like they kind of helped her in terms of music. So if that is actually true, that tells me that Ice Spice's number one talent, it may not be rapping, it's actually social climbing. And a lot of people grossly underestimate the power of leveling yourself up when it comes to the social life you want to live. And let's think about that word actually, social status, social climbing. What I mean is thinking about the type of social life you want. What types of people do you want to be associated with? What types of friends do you want? Because I know that for me, I don't want toxic friends where they're going to be throwing drinks and stuff like that. No, I want my social life to be healthy and peaceful. I want to go where I'm celebrated. And then also, what type of socioeconomic status do you want? Do you feel like you have to be a multimillionaire or a billionaire? Or is 6 figures good enough for you? Maybe you want to migrate, you want to move to a different country or something like that. So that's the type of stuff that I think about when I think of social climbing. And then the next question I like to ask myself is, what positive stereotypes do I want to associate with that can help me get there? So for example, back when I wanted to transition into finance, I don't have a finance degree. But I started to think to myself, okay, what comes to mind when I think of a finance professional? And so I thought of the positive stereotypes that I associate with finance. I thought about accountants. I thought about learning bookkeeping skills. I thought about dressing professionally or being really good at like writing resumes and being good at interview skills. I thought about keeping up with like the financial things that are happening in the US, whether it's like reading certain articles, maybe keeping up with Forbes or like watching finance YouTube videos. So that's exactly what I started doing. I started learning about the little bookkeeping softwares and stuff. And then before I knew it, I had actually manifested becoming a real life accountant because I was able to psychoanalyze myself and kind of like be introspective. And then I utilized my own internalized positive stereotypes of finance and finance professionals, and I started to embody those things, and it helped me to actually be taken seriously in that career field. Also, even if you think about the word exotic or exotical, the reason why some people are triggered by that word, same thing with the word privilege. The reason why people are triggered by those types of words is because in their own minds, they have both positive and negative stereotypes of those words. So the positive stereotype that people have of those words is that you have social status. Maybe it's easier for you to social climb. Maybe you are more admired or something like that. Maybe you are a person that lives the soft life. So those are the positive stereotypes. And then the negative stereotypes people have is you think you're better, or you're trying to say that other women are ugly or other women are beneath you because you think that you are pretty. And so the thing to remember about stereotypes is that there are positive and negative stereotypes. I've only ever seen people focus on the negative stereotypes. I have never in my life seen any content creator focus on positive stereotypes and what they are and how to pinpoint what positive stereotypes you have. So for example, even if I look at like the divestment movement, I notice they have a lot of positive stereotypes about non-Black men. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think it's beautiful if you appreciate other cultures. I mean, obviously, I'm always going to support multiculturalism, but that's an example of positive stereotyping. So I want you, as you're watching this, to think within yourself, are there any areas in my life or in other people's lives that I associate with positive stereotypes? Are there any hairstyles in particular or makeup looks in particular that I associate with positive stereotypes? So whenever we get into the texturism conversation, the internalized texturism conversation, I've noticed that people have a tendency to think that if you change your natural hair in any way, it's because you automatically hate yourself. And I will say that in some cases, yes, it is. But in other cases, what I try to point out on here is that a lot of people simply associate positive stereotypes with maybe a curly hair texture, or I don't know, some sort of pin curls or something, or a straighter hair texture. So that's going to be another thing on your journey of social climbing, is trying to pinpoint the difference between positive stereotyping and then straight up internalized self-hate. Because another thing I've noticed is that whenever someone uses that word pedestal or pedestalization, or this person puts you on a pedestal, or I want a man that puts me on a pedestal, what they're really saying is that I want someone who positively stereotypes me. It means a positive stereotype. Pedestal is a positive stereotype. And so if you have a bad relationship with stereotypes, or you have a bad relationship with pedestals, you have a bad relationship with social climbing, then it's going to be very difficult for you to social climb or to attain any of those things, because you have too much cognitive dissonance. That's no different than a person wanting to become rich, but then they think that money is evil, or they think that money is the root of all evil. So those two beliefs actually tend to go against one another. So that's something else that I've had to do on my journey. It's to overcome the limiting beliefs that I may have surrounding pedestals or social climbing or privilege. Who has it? Who doesn't? Positive stereotypes. Am I positively stereotyping, or am I just negatively stereotyping myself? But what positive stereotypes are you usually associated with? That's another thing that can help you on your journey of self-love and living the soft life. What positive things do people say about you, even if it's not entirely true? So, for example, I've noticed that people tend to associate me with being very confident. And I don't consider myself to be the most confident person in the world. By the way, nobody is perfectly confident 24/7. There's no such thing as a perfectly confident person, because there's no such thing as a perfect person. But I've noticed that being confident is a positive stereotype that I receive all the time. So you can start to look at your life and think to yourself, what compliments do I usually get, to the point where I feel like that compliment is actually inaccurate? So another thing that I get is that I'm some sort of master manipulator. That's even on YouTube. People, they think I'm some sort of master manipulator, some sort of like master cult leader or something. And so they're actually positively stereotyping my intelligence. They're putting my intelligence on a higher level than what it actually is, or what I'm actually capable of doing, because they are positively stereotyping my intellect. And so how can I use that to my advantage? So you can think about that within yourself. I've noticed another thing is that a lot of people, they associate pretty women with being seductive. And that's actually not entirely true. I mean, a woman can be pretty and she could be totally shy or like insecure and awkward and stuff and like not seductive. But because people put that positive stereotype on beauty, you can actually utilize that stereotype to your advantage. So if you feel insecure about like your sex appeal or something, I don't know, your seduction level, then you can think to yourself, well, my beauty is kind of positively stereotyped as being seductive without me even trying. Have you ever noticed that there are some women who just look seductive, and then there are other women who have to jump through all these hoops? They have to watch 10 hours of femininity content, or how to seduce a rich white man, how to seduce your way into hypergamy, and it's harder for them. Well, part of it is because maybe they feel like their look is not associated with seduction, or maybe they don't feel like their particular type of beauty is associated with that. So these are all questions that you can ask yourself. What do I think of in my head when I think of seduction? So when I just said that word, an image in my mind popped up, kind of a faceless image of like, I don't remember what the cartoon is. I don't know if it was like Jessica Rabbit or something like that. But I'm thinking of just red lips with like a strapless evening gown. I tend to think of an evening gown as being seductive for some reason. And also like, the long gloves that can match the evening gown. So I'm thinking of kind of this retro vintage beauty. That's what I associate with seduction, because when I just said the word, the image that popped up in my mind, like that was the image that popped up. Also, I will say I did think of a long kind of like pin curl hairstyle, almost like Marilyn Monroe's hair, but like a longer version of it. But the hair that I thought of was like black hair. So that's something else that I can psychoanalyze within myself. I associate pin curls with being a seductive hairstyle because I kind of associate it with like the 1950s, or even like the 20s, the 1920s flappers and stuff, and like swing dancing. So apparently that is what I associate with being seductive. So whenever you are on your journey of kind of leaning into positive stereotypes and kind of like utilizing those things to your advantage, I want you to focus on the images that pop up in your head. So, what image pops up in your head when I say beautiful? Did a certain woman pop up in your head? Did a certain celebrity pop up in your head? Did your own image pop up in your head? Also, I want you to look back on your life and think about the times when you felt the most positive about yourself, or think about the times when you had the most social status. When was that time in your life? Is it right now? Was it at a different time in your life? And if so, what's the difference between you having this social status and you feeling invisible? Do you feel like you got more social status because you were thin? Do you feel like you got status and positive stereotypes because you had a nice attitude, because you were very smiley and bubbly? Because I've noticed that's happened to me before too. Like in real life, I'm really smiley. I'm very much like a girl's girl in real life. So people tend to positively stereotype me as being friendly and sweet and very kind. But what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comments section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.